All right, good evening, everybody. Time is now 6:03. We're going to call the meeting to order. Councillor Zelka, can you hear me okay through the system? Great. As we call the meeting to order, we do as we always do in every meeting, acknowledge that the lands on which we're gathering is the traditional territory of the Coast and the Straits Salish peoples. Specifically, we recognize the Lekwungen-speaking peoples, known today as the Songhees and the Esquimalt nations, and that their historic connections to these lands continue to this day. Up first, we have approval of the agenda for February 28th, moved and seconded. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? Not opposed. We have adoption of the minutes. We can do all three together, moved and seconded. Of all three, are there any corrections or changes to any of them? Amendments? No, not seeing any. I'll call the question then. All those in favor? Opposed? Not opposed. Thank you for that. We just now received committee minutes and public hearing reports for the Heritage Commission of January 18th. Moved and is there a seconder? Seconded, thank you. Any discussion on those? Not seeing any. This is mostly a procedural piece, so they form part of the official record. All those in favor? Any opposed? Not opposed. Thank you very much. As we start our mayor's remarks, two quick things. After the mayor's remarks is the public input session. And so if you're watching the live stream, it's probably worthwhile for you to call the 1855 number at this point and hit *9 to raise your hand. And that way we will see anybody who wishes to speak. There's nobody registered, so if there's nobody with their hands raised at that time, we'll probably move on to other council business. So again, if you're watching on the YouTube and you're listening to me say this, call in at the 1855 number within the agenda package and hit *9 to raise your hand. Of course, if you're in the Zoom, you can raise your hand within the application at the time I make the call. And I also just want to say how nice it is. We're starting to work our way back into the chambers here again, as we've sort of worked our way through the peak of Omicron. And we certainly hope to have more and more sense of normality as time goes forward. I have a few things to talk about tonight, though it won't take a lot of time. One is just a reminder that our infill housing program is underway. We've had all of our walk shops are now complete, where we invited members of the public to register and join us for in-person walks to the community to look at housing forms that exist and housing forms that might exist. It was a great feedback. We've had a lot of positive comments, but I also want to remind people that the connect.oakbay.ca/infill is the project page where ongoing communications and surveys, etc., will be posted. So please go there if you have any interest in the infill housing piece. Also, speaking of housing, I know there's been news stories over the last week of the province talking about taking some authority from municipalities in terms of some of the approval process. That's a little undefined, but I've already seen considerable expressions of concern from UBCM, the Union of BC Municipalities, to which all municipalities are members, and is our voice to the province. We don't know the detail of what's being talked about, but I think it's just, I would like to comment that the tone I've heard seems to imply that the municipalities are part of the problem and not part of the solution. Certainly my conversation around this council table and certainly with other councils in the region is that we see ourselves as part of a solution, in fact, a critical part of that. And certainly this council, with the efforts to deal with secondary suites, infill housing, and in our strategic priorities for next term to tackle village plans and corridor housing. I think all forms of housing are seen as important to be looking at. Our work here is to take the general effort to get more housing and move it into the specific in terms of what gets built. And that's, we have planners, we have engineers to look at things like traffic planning and capacity of our infrastructure and other aspects that play into it. And so I'm very excited about the opportunity that the province is looking at this, and I just encourage the province to speak with UBCM to make sure that there's a good dialogue, to make sure that whatever gets done does it in the right way, and still ensure that there's still a public voice attached to any of these processes as well. And finally, just turning from the local to the global, I just want to acknowledge, as we're watching the events unfold in Ukraine, I want to acknowledge the bravery and the suffering of the Ukrainian people. I also want to just acknowledge the global response to fighting the aggression that's there. And of course, there's a lot of uncertainty in the world as a result of all of that. And, you know, Thomas Jefferson at least was attributed with saying that the price of freedom is eternal vigilance. Bullies are bullies because people don't stand up and speak to them, and it's up to us, on a day-to-day basis to do that. I'm very pleased to see what the world is doing. We obviously don't have a chance to impact the Ukrainian conflict directly. I think we can just state publicly that sort of bullying, invasion, coercion by force is always unacceptable in any scenario. So I just want to make that statement. I just also want to express my appreciation for living where we do, where we have this base, we have an aspirational society. We're not perfect, but by aspiration and by statute, we recognize the freedom of speech, the right of assembly, acceptance of all these global rights that are recognized. We do recognize that people are all individuals are equal and respect the rule of law, and I just really appreciative. We are now flying the Ukrainian flag in front of the Municipal Hall as a symbol of solidarity. And I want to just let people know as well, if you haven't heard, the federal government is matching donations for the Red Cross. If you're making donations to the Ukrainian Relief Fund, they are matching those donations at this time. So I'll encourage anybody who hasn't to do so, as we have many Ukrainian descendants and Ukrainian imports, both in Oak Bay and around Canada. So thank you for that and giving me the opportunity just to speak a little bit. I don't usually speak to things outside of our remit, but I think it's an unusual time in the globe at the moment. That concludes my comments. So we'll move on to the public comment and question period. Again, if you called into the 1855 number, this is the time to hit *9 to raise your hand. We just did a revision of our procedures bylaw. Go ahead, Councillor Green.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. I just wanted to say thank you very much for flying the flag. I saw an email from a resident today urging us to do so. So thank you to staff, whoever arranged that. I'm really grateful. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Green. It was a team effort to find a flag and get it up there, and so thank you for that. So the public public input, this is just a chance for anybody from the public who wishes to address council on any issue of interest and related to the municipality can do so. Every regular scheduled meeting we do this, whether it's committee of the whole or council, we allocate up to 30 minutes, 3 minutes per speaker to address us. So any meeting you can do this, and of course we are also looking at scheduling 3 town halls coming forward this year to allow for a more sort of invited, fulsome discussion on topics of interest. And of course, never to set aside, we can always just write us an email or call us. All of our contact information is posted on the website, but this is a chance to speak more publicly on issues of interest to you. I don't see members of the public having raised their hands in the app. Ms. Williams, before I move on, can I just confirm with you that there's nothing showing in our system?
Thank you, Your Worship, you're correct.
Okay, thank you very much. I will keep an eye on the screen. If a phone number pops up and a hand raises in the next little bit, I'll try and kind of circle back because we do want to give opportunities to the public where that's possible. So up next, under number 7 on the agenda, we have the Heritage Commission proposal work plan, and we have Ms. McDougall, the acting manager of planning, talking with us or introducing this item for us this evening. I see Ms. McDougall online. Welcome, Ms. McDougall, to the meeting.
Thank you so much, Your Worship. Just doing a sound check. Are you able to hear me all right?
We can hear you very clearly. Thank you.
Perfect. So a proposed Heritage Commission work plan for 2022 has been prepared by staff in collaboration with the Heritage Commission and is being presented to you today for Council's consideration. The proposed special projects and initiatives are detailed in attachment number 1 and include volunteer development, updating website materials, expanding the Community Heritage Register, and conducting a heritage best practices review. These projects and initiatives are in addition to the advisory body's core duties and therefore require approval from council. Each proposed initiative should be evaluated within the context of the current corporate plan and council's strategic priorities, the Oak Bay Heritage Plan and the official community plan, as well as operational and budgetary implications, organizational capacity, and available staff resources. The Heritage Commission is requesting a total of $10,000 to implement its work plan in 2022. The funds are allocated between 2 initiatives, $2,500 for professional development and $7,500 to support the Heritage Best Practices Initiative. These funds are contained in the provisional 2022 budget that's been presented to Council. Council approval of the Heritage Commission work plan is required before it can be implemented. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. McDougall. I'm going to just, Councillor Appleton, do you want to add anything to this since you're the liaison? You don't have to. Go ahead.
Thank you, Worship. I appreciate that opportunity. And I will just, I would start by just extending my appreciation to staff, especially Ms. McDougall and Ms. Winter, for their support of the commission in getting this developed. I think staff will, council will recognize that this work plan development piece is relatively new with the committee and commission review and our new bylaw structure. So this was a bit of a new item for the Heritage Commission members, and I think that they're enthusiastic and have lots of different programs that they would like to undertake, and so drilling that down and getting that into a format that was manageable, speaking to staff capacity and staff resourcing, those types of things, which are, you know, those sort of pointed conversations to have, all ably handled by staff, and I really appreciate their work on that. So I think it started with a very broad conversation and got a really good wide-ranging conversation on a number of different topics to arrive at this. So I think that this is a good satisfactory outcome. I think folks were pleased with where it landed. I don't want to speak for the membership, but I certainly think that it was informed by a really great process discussion, and it I think really crystallizes their intent and kind of what I think we've heard from our committee and commission members the sort of a certain degree of not discomfort, but a certain degree of getting accustomed to the new way of doing things and the new systems being put in place. I think that what we've arrived at here sort of allows the commission members to sort of see the future work more clearly. So I think that they're ready to now implement this with council's approval to get down to business and get something really positive accomplished. So thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you, Councillor Appleton. I should have noted, not sure I said it out loud to the people at home, that Councillor Appleton is the liaison to the Heritage Commission and Foundation. So appreciate that input. Are there any questions? Is there any other member of the Heritage Commission with us as well, Ms. McDougall, tonight? Is the chair here?
No, I believe the chair has unfortunately had to send their regrets this evening.
That's fine. I just wanted to know where I could direct questions if there were any. Go ahead, Councillor Green.
Thank you, and thank you through you to Councillor Appleton and to staff for the report. I really appreciate it. And I just have a question on process. Are the work plans, excuse me, are they developed in such a way that they're flexible to a degree? If, excuse me, if adjustments have to be made?
I'll finish your question for you, Councillor Green. And are they prescriptive in that case, or are they flexible? Ms. McDougall?
Yeah, perhaps I can take a first stab at that, and then perhaps if maybe someone from corporate services wants to speak to that a bit further, that would be appreciated. But from my perspective, they are certainly, there's some flexibility there, understanding that things obviously change and sometimes circumstances arise that we can't predict. So I certainly anticipate that there's some degree of flexibility in there, but again, perhaps maybe someone from corporate can elaborate on that a bit more.
Sure. Thank you for that. I'm just giving a moment here. Councillor Green, I'm afraid, swallowed something wrong and is coughing in the other room to clear her throat. So we'll just give it a second here to come back, and Ms. Williams, would you be the one that would expand if there's anything you wish to add in terms of the flexibility of these work plans? This is the first time we've actually implemented them, so we're not too entirely clear on how prescriptive they are.
Thank you, Your Worship. I would have to defer to somebody in the planning department. I unfortunately don't have that knowledge of their individual work plans, but certainly I think CAO Varela is probably on the line and could chime in and let you know.
Thank you. Ms. Varela, I guess we'll play this one a little bit by ear at the end of the day because it's our first. But do we have any sort of formal sense of what's, when we approve this work plan, I'm assuming it's best effort and a little bit flexible, but is there anything in our approval that ties these things down or attaches the timeline?
Thank you, Your Worship. So really the intention is to have some assurance for the volunteers that they do have budget available. There is some training that's indicated in there. There's memberships, things like that. So really it's about giving a surety to the members that they have some budget. At any time, an advisory body could come back and make a request of council. But again, we're trying to make these decisions to link in with council's strategic priorities and the budget process. I wouldn't say it's ever locked down. It's really about providing some predictability and assurance that that budget dollar is there for them.
Thank you very much for that, Ms. Barella. Any other questions? Go ahead, Councillor Patterson.
Yes, thank you, Mayor, and very nice to see the work plan developed here and some guidance as to how these things will move forward. It's very appropriate. We just passed Heritage Week, and so I'm going to put a couple of questions forward about that. I should also add, for those who don't know, if there are members of, either members of the Commission or members of the Heritage Foundation are members of BC Heritage, during Heritage Week, you can participate in any webinars free of charge. So that's a good time to kind of load up on those. But I noticed that this year's theme is altogether inclusive. And the proclamation is fostering best practices in diversity and accessibility. And specifically, it does reference introduction to Rick Hansen's Foundation's accessibility certification. So not that I mean to alter the work plans in any way, but I would make a suggestion that perhaps the Commission, and I know there's cross-reference, cross-pollination with the Foundation, perhaps that is something that they might consider in what they're doing. And there was also a new topic introduced, sustainability and heritage conservation. So that both of those, I think, fit quite well with best practices in heritage. So perhaps as that piece unfolds, that might be something that could be incorporated into the framework of what is considered. So just my suggestion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Patterson. Any other discussion on the report in front of us? Perhaps we'll get a motion to receive first and moved and seconded. Any discussion? All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. And I guess look to council for another motion, which would be approval of this or an inclusion with the financial plan as recommended. Go ahead, Councillor Appleton.
Thank you, Your Worship. So I would move that the Heritage Commission Work Plan for 2022 be approved, that the budget for the Heritage Commission Work Plan be approved, and that the 2022 version of the 2019 to 2022 Council Priority Plan be amended to incorporate the same.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Thank you very much. Any other discussion on that? Before I call the question, I just will add my 2 cents to it, just to appreciate the work that staff, Councillor Appleton, but mostly the Heritage Commission have put into this. Going through this list, there's a lot of familiar things, work that I know have been of interest to the Commission for a number of years, and I think one of the reasons that we've changed the procedures bylaw in this process to allow us to actually attach budget to some of these pieces is to actually enable this work to go forward. And there's 2 key things I really saw here. One was just being able to assign a budget to their work feels very satisfying that we're actually supporting the volunteers in a way that's meaningful. And 2, that we're providing training. So not just staff support, but actual training at their request. I think we're seeking the most knowledgeable group of people, and the way to do that as a bunch of as volunteers is to provide that training. And so I'm very glad that they've identified that, and I'm very glad that this work plan includes it, and I'm glad that council appears to be supportive of that. So, and I certainly am. So those are my observations of this, but it's great to see this first of these work plans come through. And as the first one, I have to say it's pretty impressive. So any other discussion? I'll call the questions then. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. Thank you very much. Moving on to item number 7. Oh, My apologies, though. I should have opened that up for public input. If anybody did wish to address us on that one, we could always reopen the issue. So if you call the 855 number and hit *9 to raise your hand, we will take that. I will, however, move on to the next agenda item. If you wish to address us on the Todd House renovation project, this is the time to call the number and hit *9 to indicate that you wish to address council as part of the public input on this agenda item. So with that, I will move over to Mr. Haran, our Director of Engineering, and if you could please introduce this item, Mr. Haran.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. This report describes the process for the initial stages of the Todd House renovation project. So the initial scope definition activity that resulted in 2 phases or projects that are identified for Todd House. The first one is the urgent upkeep work to address 12 plus years of deferred maintenance on the property: roofing, chimneys, exterior painting, weather protection, site drainage, fencing, and porches and patios. And the second phase is the still to be defined conservation strategy or plan and the work associated to delivering that plan, all related to future improvements for the site. In 2021, last year, Council provided initial funding for project approval activities in the 2021 to 2025 financial plan. And now we've reached the end of the project definition phase. We're ready to move into the project implementation phase, which requires 3 decisions from the governance level for us to proceed through this stage gate or decision point. The first one is approval of the baseline budget for the project of $483,000. The second one is authority to award construction contract to Thuja Craft in amount of $389,000. And the third one, which will be discussed a little bit later, I think next on the agenda, which is the heritage alteration permit for the property, which is Ms. McDougall's report next on the agenda. I'm ready to answer any questions about the project. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Haran. Go ahead, Councillor Braithwaite.
Thank you. Mr. Haran, if this goes forward, is there still a possibility that perhaps we might receive some funding along the way, since this would be a project that I guess you could call shovel-ready?
Mr. Haran?
Yes, thank you for the question. No, this one is not a question that's set up for grant applications. This one is one that we're ready to go. In fact, if we had been able to shorten the timeline for the project definition, we might have even tried to get it organized for last summer. So it's really about getting construction started here within the next month. This is upkeep work as opposed to specialized conservation work. There is another grant application that was done for the second phase, which is really a lot more a suitable type of project for achieving grant application stuff. So this is basic maintenance that we intend to do as quickly as possible this year. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Haran. Thank you, Councillor Braithwaite. Go ahead, Councillor Patterson.
Yes, thank you, Mayor, and through you to staff. Thank you, Mr. Rand, for this report. A couple of questions. On page 2, if I could just get a clarification, it does say that following the high priority work, staff will work with heritage restoration experts to identify recommended next steps, which I guess could be that further budget that we was looked at in addition to this. But it does say that that report would then be about 15 to 20,000. I'm just wondering, is that in addition to the 483,000 request in this budget, or is that included in the 483?
Mr. Haran?
Yes, thank you for the question. I'll try to clarify. The Heritage Works they are our conservation consultants for this project, and part of that is helping us put together the scope of work for this upkeep project, which we're about to start. And part of that 40,000 that is part of their contract is to be involved day to day during the construction process, not only to supervise the work that's happening and to make recommendations and decisions about things that pop up during the renovation process, but they're also there to get involved as the work is happening, they can more easily see what's going on with the property, with the building itself, and start gathering some more information and getting a good sense of what the future conservation plan for that property would look like. So it really is about defining that next phase even more in depth, and being involved intimately in the project day to day helps them do that in a thorough and professional way. Thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead, Councillor Patterson.
Yes, thank you for that information, Ms. Turan. Now, I notice also in the report, it's recommended that $260,000 come from the Todd House Trust, the reserve fund that is set up, and $223,000 be funded from the Infrastructure Reserve Fund. And I know that, like, the $223,000 then would be equivalent to almost 40% of the infrastructure renewal tax increase contribution for this year, because that in our financial plan, the total was $570,000. So what was approved for 2022, this would be a significant portion, and there could still be more work for this project. So I think the majority of residents really think of the infrastructure reserves and the contributions they're making through taxes as roads, sidewalks, sanitary and storm sewers and water lines. And I don't know what their reception would be to the funding for a heritage site in such a large amount. So I'm just wondering, and Councillor Braithwaite touched on this about the grant funding. I know that the province grants the land to the district in return for the district being responsible for conservation and preservation expenses. But that seems like it's a fairly unequal deal, because we have a lot of the expense for the use of the site. So is there a way, when we come out of this, any way for staff to approach the province with discussions on this? Because it does seem that the ongoing life cycle costs, the sustainability of this heritage site, adds up to a significant portion of our infrastructure funding here. And so, you know, it's really how do we best allocate the dollars that we have when so much could be going to this one site, which isn't really usable by all members of the public.
Thank you, Councillor Patterson. Mr. Horan, I'm not sure if we have Mr. Payne on the line here. I don't see him, so I guess it's falling on you to answer the question. And it probably touches on more than just the Heritage House, but on buildings in general. If that infrastructure fund is intended to help also cover the cost of replacement of buildings.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. The Infrastructure Renewal Reserve definitely includes the life cycle management of our facilities as well. So our full facilities portfolio. And that portfolio is part of what we are looking at in detail in the Facilities Master Plan activity, which the results of which we're intending to bring forward to Council in the short term here in the next couple of months. But the points are well taken from Councillor Patterson, and it's definitely a concern that and an issue that staff as well is acquainted with as well, and it's a concern, because what we're looking for is sustainable service delivery. So when we look at what is our full facilities portfolio, what services do they provide, what are the costs to operate those facilities and to renew them and to keep and upkeep them, we definitely want a full sustainable program. So in this case, I think what council can depend on in terms of Todd House is 2 times, at least explicitly currently planned, 2 times to in the future to discuss this more fully. One will be when we come back with the project closeout report for this upkeep project that's meant to happen this year. We are going to have an ability to talk a little bit about what was discovered by Heritage Works and what the second phase would look like. And that was a good touch point from the council governance perspective to do some decision making about how much resources to devote to the future of the site. And then the other touch point from the council perspective will be looking at the full portfolio when the results of the facilities master planning activity is discussed at the council table. So both of those are opportunities where facilities are being discussed and levels of service and funding for those levels of service are discussed, then council can either seek more information or provide direction at that time around priorities going forward. Thank you.
Patterson?
Yes, thank you, and I appreciate Mr. Horan responding to that, since Director Payne is not available with us tonight. Perhaps then we could just add on that a brief review, perhaps for council, on the differences of operating the site as we have keeping the facility as an occupied tenancy versus what might be available to us if it was treated as more of a museum site, because I think the funding streams might be different for those. So perhaps that would be worth looking at when it comes back to council for review. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Patterson. I think that is a good discussion. I know it's been sort of mooted at various times, but I think with the detailed information coming back, it may be something we refer to the Heritage Commission to also look at and give some direction. Any other discussion on the item in front of us? Questions? I just need a motion, then we can, actually, before I do that, I'm going to just remind the public, if anybody from the public wishes to speak. I see nobody who's indicated they wish to speak to us on this item. So having called for that, I will move into the motion phase. If you do, please call the 1-855 number and hit *9, and we will take any comments or questions that you might have as the public. Councillor Appleton, do you want to make the motion?
Move receipt of the staff report, Your Worship.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. Go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship. I would move that the Todd House renovation project baseline budget be set at $483,000, and that the construction contract be awarded to Theocraft in the amount of $389,000.
Moved and seconded. Thank you. At this point, Councillor Zelka.
Thank you very much, Chair, and I'm speaking in favor of the motion. I'm very pleased to see this moving forward. This is an essential part of the fabric of Oak Bay and, of course, the history of Western Canada, and is an example of the settlement and of some of the what are now referred to as settlers in this area. So I know this building is slowly falling into the earth. So I'm definitely looking forward to seeing it have some new life breathed into it. And at the appropriate time, I will be also asking, possibly if staff knows now, how we set the future plans for this building going forward. I know it has been used for rental housing in the past. I don't know whether we have made that decision yet or not. I thought I would just ask that question in general first, and to see if we have some idea of what the building will be used for, and the lands, of course.
Thank you very much, Councillor Zelka. Mr. Horan, perhaps can you share with us what is happening with the current land use? I know we have not made any determination at this point, and Councillor Patterson raised the point that we should consider that when the report comes back, the closeout report. But in the meantime, can you let us know what's happening with the building?
Yes, Your Worship. There's been no change, like no direction change in terms of the use of the property going forward. So from the perspective of staff, it's the short-term future anyway is to continue to be a residential property owned by the district and managed in that way. I think that similar to the question that was asked a bit earlier, that's those same opportunities where we talk about the sustainable upkeep of the property and the levels of service related to that. Those two touch points are the opportunities for council to, or any, there doesn't have to be at those two times, but if council wishes to do for staff to do some work in that area, we would need to receive that direction, and then we would need to assess the work involved, and then put it into the work plan to come back with timelines. I do expect that would be an expected outcome of some of the facilities master plan work that is ongoing, is a review of the future plans for that property. Thank you.
Thank you. I think suffice to say it's definitely remaining as a tenanted building for the time being. Councillor Zelka.
Thank you. The last question I'll be asking, which may not be potentially may not be answered now is I understand the province has essentially covenants on the building that directs us to do certain things with the property, the house and lands. So I'll be curious to know at the appropriate time if the province can execute any of their options to take the land back to use for other purposes as they see fit. So at some point, I'd be interested to know from staff what the province could or could not do with those lands. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Zelka. Since we have Mr. Haran here with us, he may know the answer to the question. I know they have a right of buyback. Essentially, think of the original purchase price, which is basically nothing by modern standards. But Mr. Haran, are there other pieces there that the province has rights to under the agreement?
Your Worship, I have very passing familiarity with the legal arrangements around those questions, so I don't feel comfortable necessarily speculating at the moment. We certainly can provide that information.
Sure.
It's knowable within staff. I don't particularly have that at my fingertips at the moment. Thank you.
No, that's fine. Thank you. I don't want you to guess for sure.
Yes, thank you very much. And at an appropriate time, it'll be useful to know. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Zelka. Go ahead, Councillor Green.
Thank you very much. I'll try not to cough now. My apologies. I just wanted to ask a couple of questions. First of all, the impacts of these works, will that have impacts on the tenant, and how will that be managed? Excuse me. And secondly, I just wanted to know, I think this demonstrates that a cycle of maintenance, ongoing maintenance, is really important to be identified, and perhaps it's time even to look at the agreement, review the agreement that we do have with the province, just to make sure that it's still relevant, that it still meets our needs and meets the needs for the property. So those are my two comments. Thank you. And just the question about the tenant.
Sure. Thank you, Councillor Green. Mr. Haran, I don't know if you have the details of the work plan to answer that, if you can.
I do, Your Worship. It's a straightforward answer. We are thankfully able to complete the renovation project this year with the tenants remaining in place. And so that's the plan going forward.
Thank you very much, Mr. Haran. That was my biggest concern, was about the tenants. Knowing rental housing is almost impossible to find at this time. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Green. Go ahead, Councillor Appleton.
Oh, thank you, Your Worship. Just picking up on Councillor Green's comment. At the Heritage Commission, there was a discussion very similar to that. A similar question was asked, and I understand that Heritage Works consultants who have been doing sort of the examination work to prep have been in contact with the tenant. And from what I understand, from what they had conveyed to the Heritage Commission, both that, the work could be accomplished with the tenant, and that actually the tenant was quite keen on having the work done, was quite interested in having the work done, and was looking forward to having it done.
I think any of us who've ever had a leaky roof probably would agree with that sentiment. Are there any other discussion on this or any questions? I don't see anybody from the public who has indicated they wish to speak. Give that opportunity. So I need certainly a motion for the report to be received. And then, we did that already, didn't we? Sorry, we have a motion live on the table right now for approvals. Any other discussion? Not seeing any. All those in favor? Any opposed? Not opposed. That carries. Thank you very much. And related to this, of course, we have the heritage alteration permit, which is required for heritage property. We have to approve it for ourselves as well as we approve it for other people. Ms. McDougall, I wanted to give a quick introduction of the heritage alteration permit being requested. And I believe we have someone who's registered to speak to the heritage alteration permit as well. So I'll call on Ms. Hunter at that time. But at this point, I will just go to you, Ms. McDougall, to give an introduction.
Wonderful. Thank you, Your Worship. So as you know, the District of Oak Bay has received a heritage alteration permit application to repair and restore the exterior of the protected heritage property at 2564 Heron Street, which is the Todd House. And as you know, the subject property is owned by the District of Oak Bay, and the application was submitted by agents authorized by the district. So the property is designated as a heritage site and is included in the Community Heritage Register. Attached within the Community Heritage Register listing is a statement of significance that describes the heritage value of the property and outlines the 10 character defining elements of the property and the house. The statement of significance forms the basis of analysis for the proposed heritage alteration permit works and is attached to the staff report for more information. So the proposed works focus on the exterior of the house and the surrounding landscaping. These works include the replacement of the roof, repointing and repairing the chimneys, repainting the siding, and undertaking works to ensure that rainwater drains effectively off the house and away from the property. The proposed works are detailed in Attachment 5, Condition Survey and Specification Drawings. The plans indicate that the exterior of the house will be restored to its original design and therefore satisfy the ongoing protection of the property. The siding will be preserved and returned to its original color scheme. The roof and chimneys will be repaired using the same materials as the original construction, with specific attention to the compatibility and authenticity of material and masonry methods. Alterations such as the removal of the patio and vegetation adjacent to the house are intended to better protect the frame construction of the 1890s addition. No changes are proposed to the interior elements or the massing of the house. So the Heritage Alteration Permit application was prepared for the Heritage Commission's review at their February 15th, 2022 meeting. And the Heritage Commission recommended Council approve the Heritage Alteration Permit as presented for the property located at 2564 Heron Street. The applicants, Dan Horan, Director of Engineering and Public Works, and Karen Hunter, the project manager, are available for any questions that you may have as well this evening. So that concludes my quick presentation for you.
Thank you very much, Ms. McDougall. Are there any questions of Ms. Hunter or Mr. Horan on the Heritage Alteration Permit application? I do not see any hands popping up. So can I get a motion here to receive and then to give a direction? Move receipt, seconded. Any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed, none opposed. And then direction. I've called for, yes, so just sorry, I've been keeping an eye on the screen here to see if there's any indicators of public wishing to speak. I will more formally ask at this point if there's any anybody who's indicated they wish to speak on item number 7.3. Ms. Williams?
Thank you, Your Worship. Nobody at this time.
Thank you. Move the recommendation. Is there seconded? Any discussion? Look around different places here. Don't see any hands, so I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? None opposed. That carries. Thank you very much. And thank you, Ms. Hunter, for joining us this evening on this item. I think we can let you go now. Up next on items 8 for bylaws and permits. This session we don't have public input, so the next two items are not for public input. They're just here for this table. Up first, we have the upland siting and design for 3150 Tarn Place. Mr. Weber, I believe, is providing the introduction. Mr. Weber, welcome to the meeting.
Yes, thank you, Worship, and good evening. The District of Oak Bay is in receipt of a combined upland siting and design application and development permit application for the construction of a new single-family home on the property located at 3150 Tarn Place. Staff have reviewed the proposal in context with the relevant district bylaws, official community plan policies, and the overall site design, and consider the proposal to be supportable and ready for council consideration. The subject property is located on the east side of Tarn Place near the end of the cul-de-sac, and is approximately 3,723 meters squared in area. It is bordered by the ocean to the east and single-family homes on the remaining sides, and has an RS2 one-family residential use zoning designation and uplands OCP designation. The property, or the portion of the property is, the portion of the property that is within 15 meters of the natural boundary of the sea is additionally within the shoreline development permit area as established in the district's official community plan. The applicant has already moved the existing single-family home from the property and is proposing to construct a new two-story single-family home, a single-story detached pool house, and an outdoor in-ground swimming pool in its place. No bylaw protected trees are proposed to be removed to accommodate the proposed development, and 24 new trees are to be planted, resulting in an estimated 47.8% canopy coverage, exceeding the 45% canopy coverage target for the zone required by the tree protection bylaw. As the property is within an area designated as the uplands within the district's official community plan, an upland siting design application was required, and staff reviewed the proposal for conformance with relevant upland design guidelines. Staff found the proposal to conform with the upland design guidelines and consider the upland siting design portion of the application to be supportable. At the January 4th, 2022 Advisory Design Panel meeting, the design panel further recommended that Council consider the approval of the subject upland setting design application as presented. As a portion of the proposed development is to be sited within the Shoreline Development Permit area, a development permit application for environmental sensitivity was additionally required. Staff reviewed the proposal for conformance with the Shoreline Development Permit area guidelines and found the proposal conform with the majority of the applicable guidelines, with the exception that it was not demonstrated that encroachment into the Shoreline Development Permit area is necessary due to circumstances such as topography, hazardous conditions, or lack of alternative developable land. A report provided by the applicant's consulting environmental professionals indicated that the proposed development would not negatively impact the marine environment if mitigation measures are put in place during construction, and the applicant is proposing measures to offset the nonconformity with the Shoreline Development Permit area guideline and improve the ecological sustainability of the area, including removing the existing accessory building within the development permit area, as well as restoring a portion of the development permit area with a diverse range of native vegetation. Staff are of the opinion that the development permit portion of the application is supportable. At the January 4th, 2022 Advisory Planning Commission meeting, the Commission further recommended that Council consider the approval of the subject development permit application as presented. Based on the overall results of this review, staff are recommending the subject applications be approved with conditions placed on the development permit which reflect the consulting qualified environmental professionals' recommended measures to mitigate negative impacts to the marine environment during construction. Staff are requesting Council direction on this application, and the applicant and project architect, Brian Morris, along with two of the applicant's consulting environmental professionals, Patrick Lucy and Steve Bowler, are in attendance this evening to speak to the application in addition to myself, should Council have any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Weber. We'll take questions, and I understand we have representatives of the applicant here as well. So I'll direct those the questions as appropriate. Go ahead, Councillor Braithwaite. You can start.
Thank you, Mayor. Thanks very much for your report. I do have a couple of questions, and then I'll pass it over to others who I'm sure will have some as well. The first question, and I guess I should have asked staff this prior to tonight's meeting, just because you might not have this at your fingertips, but I know that the the proposed house is going to have about 19.28% lot coverage, I think. And I'm just wondering if you know the Mr. Weber, if you know what the old house had, what lot coverage the old house had, out of curiosity.
Mr. Weber, do you know that information?
Thank you. I don't have that information off the top of my head. The applicant may have that information, however.
Sure, I'm happy to go to the applicant in that case. I believe we have Mr. Morris here as representing the applicant. Is that correct? Yes, welcome, Mr. Morris.
Yes, thank you for the question. I'm afraid I do not have that lot coverage information. It should be noted, though, that the original house was a 3-story house, which is a non-conforming by today's standards. So if that upper portion of the house was to come off and be placed as part of the lot coverage, it would definitely increase what was there before. But I'm afraid I do not know the lot coverage of the previous house.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead, Councillor Braithwaite.
Thank you, and again, kudos to the proponent for actually moving that house. It was a sight to be seen, I've heard. I'm sorry I missed it, but thank you for not putting it into a landfill. That's awesome. My next question would be in regards to something that I saw on Figure 1 in the report. And in the little box, the zoning info box, there's a little section for the front pave allowed. And it says front yard pave allowed is 25%, but what you're doing is 42.18%, and underneath it said maintain existing front yard paved surface. So my question would be, as this is a brand new house basically coming in, why is there no variance to allow a 42.18% front yard paved, which is basically 17% more than allowable, just out of curiosity?
Thank you, Councillor Braithwaite. I'm going to give that one to Mr. Weber to answer.
Yes, thank you. So my understanding is the front yard driveway there is to maintain as is in its non-conforming situation. And basically it would be considered legal non-conforming under the Local Government Act and would be permitted to remain as such.
Thank you. Just perhaps for the clarity of the question being asked, I believe was, does not replacement of the house trigger a new look at that? Does a variance, since the house is gone, does the non-conforming not disappear with the house?
Yes, thank you. And sorry for further clarification. As long as the driveway is not being touched, it's permitted to be maintained in its present legal non-conforming state. If they were to remove the driveway or alter it or expand it, then a variance would need to be sought in conjunction with the upland site design and development permit applications.
Thank you, Mr. Weber. Go ahead, Councilor Braithwaite.
Just a follow-up, is that only in the uplands, or is that anywhere in Oak Bay that would be in place?
Mr. Weber?
Yes, thank you. That would be anywhere in Oak Bay. Yeah, like I mentioned, it would be considered a legal non-conforming I guess, structure under the Local Government Act. And within the Local Government Act, there are certain provisions that allow legal non-conforming structures such as that to be, I guess, maintained as they are in the present state.
Thank you.
Thank you. I do have questions about the siting of the house, but I'll allow others to go ahead first and ask their questions.
Sure. Why don't you just ask your questions and we'll get through them, just so we don't have to go circle back.
Thank you. I worry about the positioning of the house in that it is encroaching on the DPA, and I wonder if there is an opportunity to site the house further back so that it doesn't encroach into the shoreline DPA as much as it does.
Thank you, Councilor Braithwaite. Mr. Morris, perhaps you can just address the issue of that portion of the house that does encroach on the DPA, perhaps both the house and then the pool itself.
Certainly, thanks for the question. I was just wondering if council members received my design rationale.
We did. We have that that report in there. I think it covers the presentation of the pool. I'm not sure if it covers the encroachment of the house so much in that one portion.
Yes, I believe, well, my understanding is that the pool patio, planters, stairs, part of the pool is encroaching into the Sdpa. And there might be a 6-inch by 6-inch corner of the house that encroaches, but for all intents and purposes, it is the pool patio, planters, stairs, and part of the pool as well.
Councilor Braithwaite, do you want to be more specific? I'm looking at the drawing here. There's some stairs at the northeast corner. You've corrected a small corner of the house, and then the pool area are highlighted as encroaching into the 15-meter setback.
Yeah, sorry, Mayor. I'm just trying to get to that page on my iPad.
Well, just in terms of getting a question answered, are you just asking for the justification of the house portion, or would you like just the house and the pool?
I think the house and the pool, please.
Mr. Moore, just for the interest of those watching as well, perhaps you could just give a brief overview of the rationale for allowing the house and the pool area to encroach into the DPA.
Certainly. Yeah, my design rationale, I sort of set out 3 factors. The first factor being zoning setbacks and the Sdpa requirements. So the Sdpa accounts for 35% of the overall lot size, and the other setbacks account for 25% of the overall lot size. So essentially 60% of the lot is what would be considered undevelopable in terms of not being able to build in those areas. So that left us with about just under 16,000 square feet of space to locate the pool and the house itself, obviously, and the garage and the pool building. So for that was sort of one area that was of concern. And then the other was just trying to work within the design guidelines for the uplands area in terms of providing setbacks and a residential park setting, transitioning from private to public, effective shadows on neighbors and overview and privacy. We took into account the view corridors of the neighbors and various factors like that. So when we take away the setbacks and the Sdpa, as I mentioned, we're left with 40% of the site. And then when we think about placement of a pool, it needs to be in a sunny location, otherwise it will not get used or enjoyed. So we actually did a very intense study of the existing trees along the south property line, had the surveyor give us the tops of those trees. We did a shadow study based on that information, plus we photo documented where those shadows were at certain times of the year, and just to make sure that any location for the pool was outside of those existing shadows. And we didn't want to remove those trees because they provide part of the park-like setting and provide privacy, and they also help with our tree canopy coverage as well. So that was sort of a given that we were trying to work within. And in that regard too, we also located the garage right off the existing driveway, and we kept the house and the pool building north of the pool and west of the pool, so those two buildings did not cast shadow on the pool area. And then when we looked at the Sdpa, in the uplands portion of that, there was essentially just rock outcropping and manicured lawn and non-native plants. So where we are proposing that the patio and planters and stairs and pool are located are in an area where the QEP recommended that we could go into that portion of the area without any harmful effects on the biodiversity of the area. And then we are going to be planting close to 3,000 square feet of native planting in the Sdpa, and we're going to be removing a 200 square foot building that is currently in the Sdpa. So that was some of our thinking towards why everything has ended up on the site where it is. I hope that answers the question.
I think it's appreciated to be provide that. Anything else, Councillor Braithwaite? I have, go ahead, Councillor Green, then Appleton, then Zelka.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And thank you to the staff for the report. Thank you, Mr. Weber, and also to the owners and the applicants being present tonight. I have quite a fundamental question. I know a lot of work has gone into the planning for this site, and I also agree with Councillor Braithwaite. Thank you very much for moving the existing house that was on site and not demolishing it. That was wonderful. I guess my question is, could you, if you shifted the house forward towards the street, you would not then be encroaching into the shoreline DPA by 15 meters. Is that correct? I mean, you have the option of building the house outside that DPA, that 15-meter setback. Is that correct? In terms of the pool infrastructure and so on. So really, I'm just wondering what the rationale is beyond your reports, what the rationale is to site the pool infrastructure so close to the shoreline and into the shoreline DPA area. So, and encroaching by 15 meters. So that's my question. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Green. Mr. Morris?
Just a clarification. we're not encroaching by 15 meters. The actual SDPA is a 15-meter setback from the high water mark. So the amount that we are actually encroaching into the SDPA is 1,865 square feet. And the, as I mentioned earlier, we are planting native plants in the area of close to 3,000 square feet.
It's my mistake, poor wording, and it
okay.
didn't come across well. Thank you very much for the answer.
Thank you, Councillor Green. I have Councillor Appleton and Zelka.
Thank you, Your Worship, and I appreciate the applicants being here to answer questions. I'm picking up on questions that my colleagues have asked, and in my view, the siting and design that's presented here fundamentally, in my view, contradicts some of the guidelines laid out in the SDPA. Specifically, items 3, guideline number 3 to locate development outside of the DPA to provide that minimum 15-meter setback and to avoid excavation and disturbance of the upland area. These are guidelines. And the language in the Sdpa specifically says that every effort has been made to locate development outside of the development permit area. So can the applicant please comment on how that standard has been achieved in this case?
Thank you, Councillor Appleton. Mr. Morris.
Yes, thank you for the question. Yeah, I think that I would just go back to the factors that I've laid out in terms of trying to respect the zoning bylaws and the uplands design panel, and also the landscaping in terms of placement of buildings and in terms of placement of pools. We've looked at other ways of trying to achieve this, but what it ends up doing is it ends up pushing all these other things into either setbacks that would be non-conforming and would remove existing landscaping between the two or the other neighbors. So the fact that it has ended up where it has ended up is trying to ascertain what are the parameters that are inherent with the site and how to place what the clients are looking for within that. It should be noted that we are well below what is allowed to be built on this property in terms of the zoning, and we are still asking for this encroachment into this small portion of the area. This encroachment amounts to 4.5% of the total site coverage, or 13% of the SDPA. So it's not because of the wedge-shaped portion of the site, or the wedge-shaped parameters of the site. The more you move it west, the tighter it becomes. So it does start to conflict with setbacks and other design guideline concerns.
Councillor Appleton.
Thank you, Your Worship, and I appreciate that information. And I appreciate the comments. However, those comments are sort of based around the idea of working with the existing design and moving altering its location on the lot, which I understand. My take on the SDPA guidelines is that if you're making every effort to stay outside of that SDPA, you may need to consider a redesign of your proposed development. And so especially with structures ancillary to the main dwelling, such as the pool, patio, and other hardscaping that's proposed, how was a redesign contemplated to minimize the impact to the SDPA?
Mr. Morris?
Well, as I say, we did look at where we could place all of these structures within the setbacks and within the view corridors and within siting, and still create a building and an arrangement of buildings that were supportable by the design panel. Other than those sort of three factors, it was sort of logical that we try and maintain that privacy between neighbors, that we try and maintain our tree canopy coverage, and the fact that we are going into the Sdpa in this one area, that the according to the QEP, that this area was really had very low value in terms of biodiversity.
Councillor Appleton.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just one further question. Again, one of the guidelines is with respect to the not using toxic materials, the avoidance of toxic materials within the Sdpa. We have disturbance of land to construct the pool, pouring of concrete, which, as is identified, can potentially have a harmful impact, and then chlorinated water, an actual chlorinated pool being situated in the Sdpa, which would seem to run pretty contrary to that guideline. So again, I'm just wondering about the rationale for the siting in that regard, and why an alternative siting wasn't contemplated.
Thank you, Councillor Appleton. Go ahead, Mr. Morris.
Yeah, with regards to the chlorinated water, I believe the clients are looking at a saltwater pool for this location. So I'm not sure if that helps or not, but even if it was a chlorinated pool, I believe that is taken care of with any overflow going to the sewer system that is in Oak Bay.
Thank you, Mr. Morris. Go ahead, Councillor Appleton.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'll yield the floor to my colleagues.
Okay, I have Councillor Zelka and then Patterson.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you so much to the proponent for bringing forward an absolutely beautiful building. Quite large, but this is normal for the uplands, and definitely elegant, and will definitely be an addition to the neighborhood. Absolutely, and I see the number of compromises that were made, and I very much appreciate the care and consideration. I also very much appreciate that you're adding 24 trees to the property to help with things like erosion and potential sea level rise. So thank you very much for all of the adjustments that you've made to accommodate the future use of this property. I do note that with the movement of the house from where it is today to where you're proposing it to be, that by a close reading of some of your diagrams, on page 33 of 71, shows that the house appears to be moving slightly downhill, approximately 1.5 feet. And by the way, thank you for using feet. I don't mind meters, but I do notice all these dimensions are in feet and inches, which I'm fine to work with today. So the house appears to be moving not only closer to the shoreline development permit, but also slightly down in closer to water table, let's put it that way. Appears to be. When I take a close look at the diagram SK3, which is on page 42 of 71 in the package, that's the only diagram I can see that sets the floor level of the basement. And is that SK3? Where is it? And it puts it at 8 feet. Let's see, I have it here. Oh, 8 foot, 8.5 inches as the lower floor level, which I guess would be referred to as the basement in a normal house. So while I don't have really a problem with any of the design changes or considerations throughout the entire proposal, I do have a concern with potential flooding. I presume using a standard design life of this building of about 75 years, it's fairly well known that we have a concern of sea level rise. With that, the question I'd like to ask through you, Chair, really would be to Building and Planning, or possibly to our CAO. If we approve this, does this also approve the building permit, or will a building permit be coming back to this council table? Let me start with that question first, please.
Sure, thank you. Go ahead, Mr. Weber.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. Approval of the subject upland site design and development permit applications will only approve those applications. The applicant would then be required to apply for a building permit to review the proposal with the BC Building Code. We don't have any specific flood elevation level policies established at this point in time. And I'm trying to bring up the information now, but I believe this was looked at earlier on in the application stage. It was quite a while ago, so I can't recall quite off the top of my head, but I believe it was addressed.
Thank you. So what I wanted to ask was, I know our building inspector under Section 56 of the Community Charter can insist on, for example, what's it referred to as let me get the correct terminology here. Geotechnical report. And the reason I ask about this is that for a property that was only 350 meters away at 3155 Beach Drive, where a similar movement of the house was done closer to the shoreline development permit area and also a dropping of the house slightly, in 2015, August approximately, 2015, our building and planning department at the time insisted on a geotech report. And it was determined that there might be flooding potentially within the 75-year design life of the house. Now, that was 350 meters away. It's a different bay. It could be different circumstances. This may be on rock. That may not have been. But I did want to just confirm with our building and planning department that the building inspector would do a site survey or a site visit most likely. And if there was any concern, that section would be invoked for a potential geotech report.
Sure, thank you, Councillor Zelka. Mr. Weber, perhaps you can address that. If not, yeah, as best you can.
Yes, thank you. So the building official would certainly be looking at that. I just see now, as I'm getting into more of the application docs, a flood construction level report was submitted with the application provided by Rysic Geotechnical. Just going through the findings here.
I'd be very interested to know what the flood construction level geodetic might have been on that report.
Yes, it was 4.45 meters.
Above geodetic, which would put it above 8 foot 8 inches. So I'll just leave that with building and planning to deal with at the appropriate time. Because in the other case, we did a 219 covenant to make sure that future owners of this property were aware of potential issues 75 years out. I don't know whether our building and planning would consider that, but I would certainly make me feel it would make me more comfortable to approve this this proposal, knowing that there was something on the land title, letting future owners know what might be occurring in the basement.
Thank you, Councillor.
Depending on whatever the geodetic report shows. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Zelka. I think noted for staff just to make sure that they would flag that as well, just to make sure that that process is followed. A 219 would obviously come back here for approval if that was to go forward.
Thank you.
Would it be appropriate if I could just add a comment?
Absolutely. Welcome back, Mr. Morris.
Sorry to interrupt. Yes, we did a flood construction level report prior to doing any design work and by Rysic and Associates. And they gave us a 100-year target of 14.5 feet, basically. And I've checked with the building inspectors in Oak Bay, and they said as long as we keep all mechanical equipment and electrical equipment above that line, that it is still okay to build a basement in this area, but everything has to be above that magic line. And also it should be noted that along the waterfront of this property, it is all rock. And I believe it is roughly around the flood construction level or slightly higher in other locations, up to 17 feet in some locations. So just for your information.
If I may, Chair?
Go ahead.
Sincere thanks. I very much appreciate the fact that consideration was looked at and that adjustments will be made going forward. And then it'll be up to the the building inspector as to whether we need to formalize it. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Councillor Zelka. Are there other questions of the applicant at this time? Oh, Councillor Patterson, of course, you have you on my list.
Thank you, Mayor. And I also appreciate the applicants being here tonight to answer questions for council, and certainly appreciate the original house being relocated to another site and repurposed. So thank you very much for doing that. I do notice that in the architect's report, it makes reference to the majority of the encroachment area will use environmentally friendly materials. So that's the majority. Are there any non-environmentally friendly materials that are planned for the area?
Thank you, Councillor Patterson. Mr. Morris.
Yeah, the majority of the materials in the area are natural, either natural stone or landscaping. The pavers are a natural stone, the stone stairs are natural, and the retaining walls are clad in natural stone as well. So there will be a requirement for some concrete footings and some portions of the retaining walls to be partially concrete. That would be the only materials that may not be environmentally friendly.
Thank you. Go ahead, Councillor Patterson.
Yes, thank you. It also touches on in the report that there are areas of the property that can't be built on, and so that they're determined to be undevelopable. But the rationale is given as due to setbacks, consideration for overlook, privacy, shadowing, view corridors, and tree canopy coverage. And so I think perhaps this is for staff. Would those same encumbrances not be typical to all properties though that are developed on? Like I don't see those as being unique to this specific property.
Thank you, Councillor Patterson. Go ahead, Mr. Weber.
Yes, thank you. Those situations would apply to all of the other properties in these particular zone. You are correct. I guess what I should note that what the QEP report highlights is that what might make this property unique is that the area within 50 meters of the natural boundary C has been found to have very little ecological value. I think certainly if there is a situation where the area between, or the shoreline development area between the natural boundary and 50 meters back was all natural vegetation and trees, we'd be a lot more critical of an encroachment into that area. But in this particular instance, since it was indicated at very little ecological value, staff thought, especially in light of the native vegetation that the applicant is proposing to plant and the removal of the accessory structure, that it is supportable.
Thank you. And Mayor, if I might continue just along those lines in talking about the canopy, I noted on the plans that were submitted that the shore pines, which make up quite a bit of the canopy that will be that the calculation is based on for the canopy coverage for this lot. I think they're a major portion of it, but I noted that the shore pines were actually container planted. And so I'm wondering if staff can just explain perhaps for me the difference between container planting, canopy coverage, and non-container. I'm not sure I understand if there is a difference or how we calculate it.
Thank you, Councillor Patterson. Mr. Weber?
Yes, thank you. So with every development application we receive where there's an addition or new building, we do a referral to the Parks Department, and we have them assess a tree management plan that is prepared by the applicant, as well as the landscape plan that is submitted with the application. The Parks Department reviewed the landscape plan and the tree management plan, and what I'm getting at here is that it's not really up to planning staff, but Parks was satisfied with the plantings and with the use of those trees as towards the canopy coverage target. So I would assume that based on that, they would, I guess, count the same towards the canopy coverage as a non-container tree.
Anything else, Councillor Patterson?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Thank you for that information. I'm not certain that I'm still clear on it, but I will accept staff's comments on that. And I know we did hear that that the pool that is planned, that it may be a saltwater pool, but the report that was submitted with the application here, it does say that the pool will likely utilize a chemical disinfectant, most probably chlorine, which is highly toxic to marine organisms, and that care would have to be taken to construct overflow and drainage infrastructure to prevent chlorinated water from entering the marine environment, either directly or via the municipal stormwater drainage system. So I would like to either confirm that we are not going to be using a chlorinated pool and will in fact be using a saltwater pool, or that mitigation maintenance guidelines are in place for dealing with this, since it is so highly toxic to the marine environment.
Thank you, Councillor Patterson. Mr. Weber, there's a caveat here that says subject to conditions outlined within the draft development permit. Are those the kind of things that are covered within that? Or is this something that we should ask the applicant to give some more specifications for?
Yes, thank you, Worship. This isn't specifically covered within the conditions, the recommended conditions in the development permit. From our perspective, I don't believe we would be able to regulate whether they maintain the pool as a saltwater pool or a chlorinated pool. So despite what is indicated to be at present, I think there's eventuality that could potentially change over time. I did review the pool with the district's building and engineering officials, and they confirmed that it is regulated somewhat by the BC Building Code as well as the CRD, and that the water from the pool would be dealt with effectively and in a manner that wouldn't pose a threat to the marine environment.
Councillor Patterson? I'm going to ask a question before I go to second-time speakers, and that was just to touch on the this is to Mr. Morris. You spoke of sightline corridors being preserved. Could you explain whose sightline corridors are being preserved? If I look at the before and after siting of the site, the house is being pushed much more towards the shoreline from the current house siting. And so I'm not sure how that enhances view corridors from the perspective of siting.
Yes, thank you for your question. Yeah, for the north neighbor, there was no impact on their view corridor because there are existing landscape features such that there is no view across this property from their property. The view corridor was specifically for the west neighbor, which is the neighbor across the street on Tarn Place. And they currently have a view corridor that is from the south portion of what was the existing house to some trees that are in the southwest corner of the property. So we had several discussions with them, both on the phone and via email, and to the point where I actually went onto their property. They were not in town at the time. I went onto their property and documented by photographs their view corridor, and we had a discussion as to what was important to them. And so we are not touching the trees in the southwest corner of the property, and how our house, the proposed house, is located is it will not be any further south than the existing house was. In fact, it may end up being slightly more to the north, just by virtue of the more you locate the house eastward, because of the angle of the house and the angle of the property, it actually starts pulling it away from the south property line. So their view corridor in terms of the width of their view corridor would be identical, if not slightly wider. The bottom portion of right now or previously on the site, right next to the driveway, there was a pergola, and that identified their bottom portion of their view corridor. It was determined that the proposed pool building would be approximately 1 to 2 feet higher than that existing pergola. And in fact, that pergola may end up being taller because it had plantings on it. And when we were looking at it, it was in the wintertime. So it was agreed that it was going to be virtually a negligible impact on that view corridor. And they have indicated to us that they're happy with the proposal and what we're doing and what we have done for them.
Mr. Morris, I now move back to second-time speakers, Councillor Braithwaite and Green.
Thank you, Mayor. My iPad just shut down again. I do have a couple of comments and questions. I think I would agree with Councillor Zelka that it is a lovely design of the house, albeit big. And I know, Mr. Morris, you said that it could be larger. Yes, it could be 6% larger, but I would argue that 6% larger would also be a lot more money than what is probably going to be paid to build the house at 19.28% coverage of the lot. So I'm not sure whether the proponent would even want it any larger than what it is. I just want to clarify that I'm reading this correctly, because I want to make sure that I make the correct decision tonight. So when I look at figure 1 on, I can't remember the page now. I had it written down. Page, I don't know. Anyhow, figure 1. There's 2 dotted lines, and just to make sure that I'm looking at it correctly, it's the second dotted line that's closest to the road, which is the line of the DPA. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay. So then, looking at that, I look at the pool, for example, and I consider that 2/3 of the pool is situated within the DPA. Would that be a fair assessment?
I did a breakdown of it, and I think it was 370 square feet is the actual pool that is in the SDPA.
Okay. So, but when I look at that line, that second dotted line, there's the stairs of the house. There's some of the second patio that's attached to the house. There's almost 2/3 of the pool, and some of that patio that fall within the, and all of the other front stairs and patio in front of the pool that fall within the DPA. So then I go back to a question that I asked in the very beginning, which was around the front paved surface area, which is currently at 41.28%, I think it is. And I wonder if that area, if the front paved area was reduced, if then everything could shift closer to the street, and you might alleviate some of the pressure of going into the DPA. And because for me personally, I would rather give concession to a setback than concession into encroaching into a DPA. So perhaps a comment on that.
Mr. Morris, perhaps just clarify for us how close the garage is to the front yard setback, and then answer the balance of the question.
Yes, the garage is just a few inches back of the front yard setback.
Could the garage be moved, I guess, would be the next question.
Yeah, I mean, I've had this question asked to me in previous jobs where, we decide that maybe it's best to ask for what we're asking for as opposed to asking for a variance. We never know until we're here what is the best approach. To me, how was explained to me was the SDPA is a guideline, and 100% adherence to those guidelines is not absolutely necessary, whereas with a zoning setback or a height calculation, those are hard and fast. Either they are work within it or they don't. So the variance process is a bit more onerous in that you would need to prove hardship. So then we would be weighing what is, a hardship. Is it a hardship that we have to go into the variance because of the Sdpa, or would the Board of Variance then say to us, well, you could have gone into the Sdpa because that is a guideline area that is negotiable through addressing it through perhaps additional native planting like we've done, or the removal of accessory buildings within that area, or the fact that there's no biological diversity in that area. Therefore, it would make more sense to the Board of Variance that we would encroach into the Sdpa. So it's chicken and the egg, I guess, sort of situation with that. And just to clarify, the pool itself is 740 square feet, and the portion that is going into the Sdpa is 370 square feet. So that's pretty close to 50%.
Thank you. And I do take your point, Mr. Morris. Sometimes it's difficult to know what council is going to, to ask for. I like to think that we try to be reasonable. And if there's obviously a concession to, to not encroach on one thing, but it might mean encroaching on something else. I like to think that around this table we have the ability to make a good decision around that and a fair decision around that. So I hope that's what happens anyhow, and I hope that's how it's perceived.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Can I just respond to that? I would agree. I mean, it's been my experience with Oak Bay that yes, reasonable and appropriate decisions have been made over the years. How we saw it was, as I say, in the Sdpa, this portion of the Sdpa, it was manicured lawn and rock outcropping that we were altering, versus if we move the buildings back to the west, we would need to be removing existing trees that are mature, which would then impact privacy, tree canopies. All those things would factor into more of an impact than building this patio and part of the pool in an area that doesn't have any biological diversity, and it really is just a rock and manicured lawns. So that was our sort of thought on which approaches should we take on this.
Thank you, Mr. Morris. Councillor Braithwaite, anything else? Go ahead, Councillor Green.
And through you to Mr. Morris and or to staff, thank you very much for all the answers, and the questions from my colleagues helped clarify a number of issues for me. So I only have one question. Will there be blasting involved on the property for construction of the pool? And if so, what mitigations will be taken to protect the foreshore area? Thank you.
Mr. Morris?
Yes, I believe there will be some blasting in order to locate the pool in that area because of the rock outcropping that is there. But with blasting these days, it's a very, very controlled approach to it in terms of, the blasting companies just do it at a very small increment each time. So that would all be protected. Plus we would have a QEP overseeing all of the construction within the Sdpa area.
Thank you, Mr. Morris. Go ahead, Councillor Green.
Yes, thank you. And just a comment, and thank you very much for answering the question. Much of the report talks about sustaining or maintaining the natural topography of the lot, of the area, of the location, and so on. But of course, we know that blasting is one of the most altering approaches to altering the natural landscapes and topography of this particular property, any property, in fact. So I guess I'm concerned about that. And I just wanted to ask a question. If you pulled everything back towards the street, and as Councillor Braithwaite pointed out, if you made a concession to move the pool back towards the street and out of the shoreline DPA area. Would the blasting still be required, if, in your opinion? Thank you.
Mr. Morris?
Yes, if you look at the grades in that area, they are all within 1 foot of each other. It's a very shallow, or a shallow slope to that portion of the site.
Thank you, Mr. Morris.
Thank you, councillors. I don't see any other hands raised. I have one follow-up question. Just touching on a point you make, Mr. Morris, about this not having, currently having much biodiversity. And my observation of the environmental development permit area, or shoreline development permit areas, which is one of the environmental development permit areas, is that the intention of it is essentially, it's not prescriptive in that things have to be restored to a natural state, but it seems clear that it's intended to any changes be moved in that direction, and one of those guidelines is to foster that biodiversity that might be missing in a fairly sterile lawn and rock wall environment. And I know in other applications at times we've looked at removing of rock walls and things to enable that shoreline grasses and things. So there's that connectivity between the natural and the built, and that's not something that's being contemplated here. But I guess perhaps you can just at the highest level convince us that what that's being proposed here is moving in the direction of a more naturalized state than what is there currently, because certainly from the glances I've looked at it, it appears to be adding considerable amounts of development within that DPA that don't currently exist, which seems to be, to my mind, not in the intention of the DPA as I see it. And I see Ms. McDougall put her hand up, so I'll let her speak to that first, and then I'll go to you, Mr. Morris. I appreciate this is sort of an opinion piece of where we value it and not prescriptive, but I just wanted to get some feedback on that piece. Go ahead, Ms. McDougall.
Thank you so much, Your Worship, and I appreciate the question and the contemplation of council this evening, because it's certainly in line with some of the discussions that staff and the applicant have had, specifically given that there are two different sets of guidelines here that are trying to be balanced and accomplished, those being the upland siting and design guidelines, as well as the development permit area guidelines. Staff and the applicant certainly have had a bit of back and forth discussion about how to better achieve environmental sensitivity in the area. Additional plantings have been added. There have been additional trees that have been secured as part of this discussion between staff and the applicant. So there definitely have been some movement, I would say, on behalf of trying to achieve a greater sense of environmental integrity of that part of the property. But I would also maybe suggest speaking to the QEP to add to some of that as well.
Sure, that's the environmental planning at the detail level. I appreciate that. Mr. Morris, you don't have to answer the broader question I asked, but if you wish to, you're certainly more than welcome to.
Certainly, yes. We've had ongoing discussions with staff, and so the established seawall does define sort of the difference between the shoreline area, which we are not going beyond that seawall and going into the shoreline aspect of this property. So it does give a defined edge, and it does also provide a barrier in terms of safety from the applicant side of things. So we would like to keep that seawall as much as we can. And we are adding close to 3,000 square feet of native plantings in the northeast and southeast corners of the property. It's been pointed out by the QEP that to add any native plantings towards the center of the property would not be viable in terms of any use to any animals or anything like that. So it was suggested or recommended by them that we take the existing environmental aspects along the property line of the north and the property line of the south that's been established, and to enhance those and add to those portions of the site, as opposed to adding anything in the middle of the site. Anything out there is what, and the QEP could speak to this, but anything out in the middle of the site is considered what he refers to as a kill zone, where any animals venturing out there to take advantage of those plantings would be fall prey to other animals in the area. So his thought was to just add to the existing corridors that are along the north and south sides of the property.
Thank you for the answer, Mr. Morris. Seeing if there's any other second time questions, if not, we'll get to some direction from council, but I have a third time speaker. Go ahead, Councillor Braithwaite.
Sorry, just to clarify, I know that it's been said that, they're planting X number of trees, et cetera, but wouldn't they have to do that no matter what, because they're redeveloping the lot? So wouldn't they have to get to a 45% tree canopy anyhow, no matter what they were doing?
Yeah, I think that's true. Mr. Weber, the guidelines, I believe, set us at 45%. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct, Your Worship.
Thank you. Okay. So this, by the nature of it, is not open to public input, so we just need to go back to council and get some direction. I guess, first off, I would just get a motion to receive the report at this point. Moved and seconded. Any discussion on receipt? I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? None opposed. And then looking for some direction on this application in front of us. Go ahead, Councillor Appleton.
Thank you, Your Worship. I would move that Upland Siting and Design Application ADP 00141 and Development Permit Application DP 00036 be denied.
Thank you, Councillor Appleton. Is there a second for that? There is a seconder. You may ask a clarifying question.
If this is denied and voted against and passes, then what is the process for the proponent to come back? Is it a 6-month wait, or is there a way that we could perhaps ask them to go away and have another look at it and bring it back without having to wait 6 months?
Thank you, Councillor Braithwaite. This is a point of procedure, and I'm happy to let staff answer. My understanding is if it's materially changed, it can come back at any time, and if it's the same application, it has to wait a certain period of time. Ms. Williams, do you have the specifics of those? No. Mr. Weber?
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. So it kind of depends on what is happening and what council would want to see done. If there's a total redesign required, it's likely it would have to go back through the advisory design panel and advisory planning commission for review prior to going to council, which would take a little bit of time. I doubt it would take 6 months, depending on how long it would take for the revisions to be completed. But certainly it would, it would more than likely need to go back to those review processes prior to going to council.
I think the simplest thing from my perspective would be to consider this, the motion, and there's a couple of options. One, the motion being considered, it can be referred back as well. But I think if it materially doesn't meet the requirements of council, that would be the motion. I would ask, though, that council, if speaking in favor of this motion, be clear about what it is that about the application that causes concern, so that the applicant can be much more certain coming back what would see favor of the body if it came back. That's, I think, only fair to the applicants in a situation like this. Since the EPA or the DPA is essentially a subjective measure based on guidelines. So, Councillor Appleton, you made the motion. I think it's appropriate that if you want to add, I think it'll let you motivate.
Thank you, Worship, and I appreciate that direction, and I'm certainly prepared to do that. I'm focusing in specifically on the guidelines in the Sdpa that specifically place the onus on the applicant to indicate that every effort has been made to minimize adverse impacts in the Sdpa. And in my view, that standard has not been met with the application that is in front of us. I see significant departures from several guidelines. I think if this was confined to a minor encroachment with perspective to one of the guidelines, I think that might be one thing. To my view, there's it essentially runs contrary to several guidelines. The ones I've mentioned, guidelines 1, 3, 6, 8, and 10, all about preventing siting and design with respect to the Sdpa. I take my colleagues' comments very well, and also Ms. McDougall's comments. where this is, to my mind, a balance between the upland siting and design guidelines and the SDPA guidelines. And I think that in this case, as the applicant has mentioned, they are adhering very closely to the uplands guidelines at the expense of the Sdpa guidelines. And I think from my perspective, my preference for this site would be to balance those things better than what is currently here. And in my view, at least from my perspective, I would be willing to potentially entertain variances on the roadside away from the water line in order to minimize the Sdpa encroachment. So in terms of guidance, what I would potentially offer up is to explore the opportunity of variances from the front yard setback and in and around the accessory buildings that are proposed in order to displace the development outside of the Sdpa. Reevaluate the need for some of the ancillary structures, not the building itself, but patios, hardscapes, and the pool itself and its ancillary machinery in ways that can be relocated in order to reduce or eliminate the encroachment into the Sdpa. And I think those things may be eminently doable by exploring variances in the front yard setbacks and in some of the guidelines that would normally fall within the upland siting and design guidelines. So I don't think that the overall design in and of itself is unsupportable. I think that there's plenty that is supportable about the overall design, but again, I return back to that original point in the guidance in our own Sdpa guidelines that says to demonstrate that every effort's been made to minimize that encroachment. I think that this proposal could go further in that regard. Thank you, Worship.
Thank you, Councillor Appleton. Go to the seconder. Do you wish to speak?
Thank you. I think Councillor Appleton has pretty much covered everything, but I share those thoughts. I would like to see more effort made to look at options for better use of the space. I'm looking particularly to move the in-ground pool out of the shoreline development permit area, and also to have more certainty around what the plans are for that. The mechanical area that is joining the pool area is fairly large. I'm not an expert in that area, but if there are any ways to mitigate some of the environmental impacts of the pool and minimize the mechanical that has to go into that. But primarily, I would like to see the in-ground swimming pool relocated out of the shoreline development permit area. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Patterson. Councillor Braithwaite.
Thanks. I'm going to speak in favor of the motion, and I would agree with all the comments that have been said so far. To me, it's really the pool that is bothering me the most about this, and so to have the pool cabana and the pool pushed more towards the roadside, I would agree with Councillor Appleton. I'd be much more inclined to give concession to that than concession to having it encroach into the DPA. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Green.
Yes, thank you. And I will be supporting my colleague's motion also. Again, I think my greatest concern does center around the swimming pool and its location. And as I've suggested, if there is some way to re-examine the how the structures are placed on the lot, and if it can be moved west, I believe west is to the front of the street front. I think looking to the west is probably something I would like to see, so that there isn't anything encroaching into the shoreline DPA area. And further, I noted somewhere in one of the reports, it may have been Mr. Morris's report, that the goal for situating the pool where it is currently located in the drawings was to maximize afternoon sun. But I'm afraid that for me, it is not worth compromising or causing potential environmental long-term damage to the foreshore. So I'm hoping that the owners will consider these issues. As well, climate change is a big factor. Anything on the foreshore now is vulnerable. And when you have a combination of high winds and king tides and all the other things, it might behoove owners to look at a way to mitigate any potential damage to something that they have constructed. So Those are my comments, and I appreciate my colleagues' comments as well.
Thank you, Councillor Green. Go ahead, Councillor Zelka.
Thank you very much, Chair. With regret, I'll be voting against the motion. I felt the proponent made enough adjustments to balance on balance. It satisfied my requirements, especially if staff is keeping an eye on things and making sure that the future public is respected. I do have concerns about sea level rise. I do have concerns with the fact that the building was moved closer to the shoreline development permit area. I'd feel certainly more comfortable if it was moved back closer to the main road. And it looks like I'll be outvoted. So that's where I am. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Zelka. I found this application very interesting, and I really appreciate Mr. Morris's willingness to come and answer the questions. At the end of the day, I don't think I'll be a swing vote on this, but my feedback on how to make this better as a whole is in alignment with what the other councillors have spoken of. I believe the pool should be moved entirely or very close to entirely out of the shoreline DPA. I think, and I believe that some of that landscape hardening that surrounds it, if that's moved away as well, to allow, particularly within the half line there, the second dotted line, which denotes the 7.5 meter setback. That's a really critical area for just small things like bugs and things that feed the foreshore to increase that biodiversity are there. If some more thoughts of biodiversity, maybe perhaps widening it, not making it all naturalized, but at least widening the areas of naturalized space to facilitate that biodiversity to start. Again, recognizing that the rock wall prevents some of that natural systems from happening. But the most that can be done within that as possible would certainly be a welcome sight in my eye. But I think, as the point made, some readjustment of the pool room / mechanical room / garden storage and the pool to allow the two of them together to be sited in a way that is, at least for me, almost entirely outside of the shoreline DPA would be a major benefit. I don't see there's a necessity to look for variances on the front. I think, first of all, there's an existing driveway there that kind of comes up against that would make it unnecessary. But there's a fair bit of space there, I think, that could be used as well. So those are my feedback in terms of where I see improvements could be made. Go ahead, Councillor Braithwaite, you wanted to speak again?
I'm sorry, I did forget one thing, Mayor, so thanks for allowing me to speak again. Just as far as the pool goes, I would like some clarification on whether it would be a saltwater pool or a chlorine pool. And if it is a saltwater pool, and that's what our expectation is there a way to ensure that it remains a saltwater pool moving forward? Is there any assurance that we can get that it would remain? Like, is there a covenant that we can put on a pool to have it a saltwater pool? I'm not sure.
It's a good question. I think it may be a level of detail that we're probably not dealing with at a shoreline DPA piece, but perhaps Mr. Weber can just have a look at that and bring it back with the next with the revision of an application if this motion passes. Councillor Zelka, did you have your hand up there briefly? Did you wish to? No. Okay. Just because the intention here, if this passes, is to give the applicant as much information as possible to clarify a reapplication or modifications to this application, probably a better way of putting it. Is there any other comments that people wish to add before I move to the question? Don't see any. So the comments seem to be largely built based around the DPA setback specifically for the pool in that piece. So thank you for that and for the clarification. I'm ready to call the question then. All those in favor of the motion and those opposed? Councillor Zelka opposed. That carries. So Mr. Weber, this is back in your hands to work with Mr. Morris and come up with a revision to this design to bring it back here for approval. Thank you very much, everybody, for that deliberation. We are moving on now to the next item on the agenda, which is 8.2, development variance permit. I feel kind of bad. I felt like I maybe should have moved this one in front of the last one as a courtesy. But we have Mr. Collins here, I see, online to answer any questions. So with that, I'm going to just let Mr. Weber, for you to provide a brief overview of the variance ask. We'll then take questions of the applicant and then seek direction from council. The direction, if council wishes to move it forward, is to go out to neighbor notification, not for approval this evening. Go ahead, Mr. Weber.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. The District of Oak Bay is in receipt of a development variance permit application to relax the minimum required clear space between buildings and structures regulation from the zoning bylaw to prevent the construction of an addition to the rear of the residence located at 2184 Central Avenue. Specifically, the property owner is requesting a reduction in the minimum required setback between two buildings on their property, a two-story single-family home and a one-story detached garage, from 3 meters to 1.53 meters to permit the construction of a one-story bedroom addition to the rear of the home. The subject property is located on the north side of Central Avenue between Victoria Avenue and Hampshire Road. It is approximately 636 meters squared in area, surrounded by single-family homes on all sides, and has an RS5 one-family residential use zoning designation and established neighborhoods OCP designation. Staff have reviewed the proposal in context with the overall building design and site design, as well as the surrounding area, and consider the proposed variance to be supportable and ready for public notice to be given following council's consideration. Should council wish to move forward with authorizing the development variance permit, notification to adjacent property owners will be undertaken in accordance with the Land Use Procedures and Fees bylaw, and the application will return to council for consideration of approval at a later date. Along with myself, the project designer, Russ Collins, is in attendance tonight to speak to the application, should council have any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Weber. Are there any questions of staff or the applicant on this application? Go ahead, Councillor Green.
Are you ready for a motion this evening, or would you like to have discussion first? I'm
Motions-
prepared to make a motion.
Motions are always in order, so if you feel like
So,
making a motion, go for it.
I will move option 1 of the staff report.
Oh, we can.
Excuse me?
It's
Sorry.
okay. Yeah, so the option, we
Oh,
can.
sorry.
It's okay. You can move that, and we'll deal with receipt afterwards. So we'll take the motion as option 1. So this is to move it forward for public notification. Okay. Any further discussion on that? Before I call the question, I'm just going to invite Mr. Collins, who has sat through our evening.
Yeah, poor Mr. Collins.
If there is anything he wishes to add to this discussion before we call the question, Mr. Collins.
I don't think so. It's very straightforward. We're just trying to preserve an existing garage and not have to rebuild it if we can help that. So yeah, it's pretty straightforward.
Great. Thank you very much, Mr. Collins. Okay. Any other discussion? Seeing none, all those in... Oh, Councillor Zelka, my apologies.
Thank you, Chair. Just a question through to building and planning. Because this garage will be much closer to the house with the addition, does this need to be passed through the fire department for their review? I just wanted to ask whether that's something we would normally do. I know the zoning bylaw was set up in such a way to ensure that we had proper fire separation. But I don't know if those rules have changed. So that's why I'm asking. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you, Councillor Zelka. Mr. Weber?
Yes, thank you. So fire safety is regulated in part by the BC Building Code. The district building officials and myself reviewed this application, and specifically with the fire regulations within the BC Building Code, and did not see any issues.
Anything else, Councillor Zelka? Okay, good question. Any other comments or questions at this point? My apologies, Councillor Zelka. It's hard to see sometimes the physical hand going up on the screen with it often gets blurred out by the background. I don't see any, so I'll call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. That'll go for notification if you're watching here tonight about that item. It will go out for public notification in a few weeks' time, 2+ weeks. We will get this back, and with any public
Move receipt?
Yes, a second. I'll moved. Just to give you for explanation. So if you're watching this and want to give a public comment, that is the opportunity to do so. Yes, the order to receive is an order. Moved and seconded. Any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? None opposed. And with that, I believe we just have new business. Is there any new business of council? Not seeing any. I will call. We just need to have a motion to adjourn. Moved and seconded. Any discussion? Seeing none. All those in favor? Any opposed? Not opposed. We are adjourned. We'll note that we started at 6:03, so we're slightly under the 2-hour mark on that one. So thanks. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Mr.